You've probably already heard about the Huawei ban. Huawei has been blacklisted from working with US companies, including Google, because of apparent security concerns. It's already had a massive effect here in the UK. Huawei was cut from the 5G launch lineup, and Huawei has literally just cancelled its recent laptop launch due to the inability to supply. So it's becoming this looming question: how on earth can Huawei compete in the smartphone market without working with Google, the company that owns Android? It all starts in a villa in Shenzhen in 2012, where behind closed doors there was a top secret meeting with a group of high-level Huawei executives. They decided there and then that a new proprietary operating system should be built, presumably because the company was growing rapidly at the time and they couldn't let their entire fate rest just on Android's shoulders. Within months, they created a specialized zone inside the company to work on this project, internally known as ArcOS, completely top secret at the time. They even had guards on duty protecting the doors, and any worker there was not allowed to use their personal mobile phone. This was that confidential. And turns out, this might well all be about to come in handy. Whilst it hasn't released yet, this operating system is now a very real thing. It's going to be called Hongmeng OS in China and apparently Oak OS in other regions. But the most interesting part is that it could be up to 60% faster than Android. Nonetheless, it's kind of clear that Huawei has been taken by surprise here. Even though they've been working on this project for years, because of how suddenly the ban came into action, it's still not ready. One thing is clear though, the fact that this is now one of their top priorities, and the CEO has even announced that it'll be available as early as fall this year, which coincides with when they might launch the Mate 30 Pro. And don't get me wrong, this whole situation is kind of prickly, but at the same time, it's kind of exciting. From some sources, Hongmeng is being dubbed as less of a last resort for Huawei and more of a next-gen bit of software. According to a job listing, Huawei has been hiring full-time engineers to work on a secret operating system that apparently focuses on tying in 5G, augmented reality, and autonomous self-driving vehicles. And so, the fact that it could be coming so soon, and the fact that it could be such a real competitor to Android, creates a really interesting dynamic between Huawei and Google. Before I can get to that, let me explain how the software works. So, Huawei can't do business directly with Google, but take a look at this. One of the apparent early screenshots of this operating system. You can see that the weather app is compatible with the Android Green Alliance. So it's not Android, but it's looking like it's at least in part based on Android and can run Android apps. This is Android without Google services, so no Google Play Store, no Google Maps, and no Gmail, plus no security updates from Google or Google Play Protect, which all sounds pretty unappealing, but if any company can work around it, it's Huawei. Take a look at this. It's called Aptoide. Aptoide is an alternative Android app store with over 800,000 apps. And if something like that can exist, then Huawei can sustain one too. They actually already have a store called App Gallery, and funnily enough, they've just started emailing developers to ask them to move their apps onto it. And I reckon a lot of them will just do it, because Huawei sells millions of phones, and developers don't want to miss out on that market. Besides, because Hongmeng OS can run Android applications, nothing needs to be recoded. They literally just need to get their application and upload it onto Huawei's store. What is potentially even more interesting is that apparently Xiaomi, Vivo, and Oppo are also testing Hongmeng OS on their phones. Maybe they also want to diversify, the same way that Huawei did, and to be fair, if the operating system is as fast as Huawei is claiming, then who wouldn't want a slice of that pie? So, if those companies also choose to start using Hongmeng, then in one fell swoop, over a third of the smartphones in the world could shift to this new operating system. But here's the crux of the complication. Google doesn't want this to happen. Google does not want Huawei to have its own operating system. Google does not want Huawei to have its own store, because this creates fragmentation. As it stands, apart from iOS, Google has an almost complete monopoly on smartphones. Pretty much every single phone runs on Android, and Google makes money from it. It makes money from the Play Store, it makes money every time someone subscribes to Google Play Music, and it makes money from the adverts inside Google Maps. And so, right now, Google is actually trying to convince the US government that instead of actually saving themselves from a security risk by banning Huawei, they'd actually be putting themselves in one. Their logic is that if Huawei starts pumping out devices with a completely new operating system, then these phones would be more vulnerable to malware. They won't have Google's protection in them. Let's say then that you're in the US on your Samsung phone and you send a message to someone in the UK who's on a Huawei phone infected with malware. In that scenario, there's a pretty good chance that your message can be read by any malware on that device. So even without using the Huawei yourself, the security of the whole mobile phone ecosystem could be at risk. That doesn't mean this would be the case, it's just the argument that Google is using to try and stop Huawei. So, the way I see it, there are three possible outcomes to this whole situation. Number one, Google pleading the US government, combined with the mounting political pressure, might make the US retract the ban on Huawei, which would allow them to use full Android just as they used to. Number 2. Huawei is really trying to compromise here. They've actually pitched a no-spy deal to the US government, saying that they could completely lock their phones up so that there was no way a backdoor could be used to retrieve US information. It's completely possible then that the US could, instead of retracting its ban, add exceptions to it. Huawei would be allowed to carry on dealing with certain suppliers under certain conditions. Number 3, there is no resolution, and Huawei carries on with its plan B. OKOS becomes a thing around the globe, and you might start seeing it as soon as this year. The last thing that I want to say about this is that you should be able to expect statements from Honor and from Huawei pretty soon, and that in the meantime, all we can do is hope. Because, let's face it, even if you wouldn't go near a Huawei phone, just them being there in the smartphone market, raising the bar, creating new things, it pushes the industry forward. More competition is always better for the consumer. If you enjoyed this video, a sub would be massively appreciated. My name is Aaron, this is Mr. Who's the Boss, and I'll catch you in the next one.